Hey, thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, everybody. This is Lori Box with NCADP, and I've had the privilege of working with the KCADP for a good while now, and so I get a chance to put some context here on, before we move into the here and now, putting a little bit of history on the table, and you all may be very familiar with this, but wanted to run through at least a little context here as we're getting ready to look forward. The death penalty's been around a long time here in this country, and it was around a long time in Kansas before it was first ended in 1907. And you may have been contacted earlier this year at around January 30th, which is Abolition Day here, and KCADP did a outreach to folks and encouraged people at the beginning of the legislature here in 2013 to touch base and encourage legislators to once again abolish the death penalty in Kansas, because 1907 you had a governor that went to the legislature and repealed the death penalty for the first time in 1907. That held up until about 1935, and none of us on this call are that old, but it was the time of Bonnie and Clyde and Pretty Boy Floyd, and a lot of folks running around the Midwest and the Plain States, and a lot of people think that may have been what prompted the 1935 reinstatement of the death penalty. And so that held until, as Jeremy mentioned, in 1972 there was U.S. Supreme Court action that ended the death penalty, and it held until 1976, when once again the Supreme Court took action, the U.S. Supreme Court took action, and brought the opportunity back for people to, for states to once again enact the death penalty. So that was 1976, and it took Kansas 18 more years to decide to reinstate the death penalty, and that was in 1994. And I'm not great on, you know, it just sort of, you look back then, and so Kansas has had an on again, off again, on again, off again experience with the death penalty, and we're about the business of making off again the winning strategy before us. There's an important note here that I want to make a special emphasis of, and that is that Kansas has not had an execution since 1965. And if my math is correct, that's at least more than 45 years ago. So the opportunity has been there, but we've not had an execution in Kansas since 1965. For the folks that are on death row now, no one, because of the process that you must go through, no one at this point is close to being executed with the folks that are on death row. So if you can go to the next slide, we'll start looking to the case of the death penalty in Kansas now. There's a lot more information on the KCADP website about what the particulars of the Kansas law. But in 1994, by a pretty slim margin, it was a hard-fought issue, but they reinstated the death penalty in 1994. And it does narrow where the death penalty capital case is. It narrows it into very particular categories in certain circumstances. And again, there's more information on the website, the KCADP website. But a couple of instances where you cannot use the death penalty in Kansas is where people were under 18 younger than 18 when at the time of the crime, or if anybody had mental handicaps, and that's again laid out in the law. And there's two phases to the prosecution, one to determine guilt and one to determine the penalty phase, in which you can argue against the death penalty with mitigating circumstances. But once there's a capital case and there's a conviction and the penalty phase is passed, it automatically is reviewed by the Kansas Supreme Court. And you may have read over the course of time that there have been problems that have come up with cases so far in the death penalty that have been reviewed by the Kansas Supreme Court, and additional action has been taken. So the law is narrow, but is also really very flawed and has had a lot of problems in front of the Supreme Court. But there is legislation now up at the Capitol, and I'm going to turn it over to Mary to talk about that and the process of getting rid of it going forward.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy and Lori. That's a very good summary of where we are, you know, as of today, where we're going to go, how we're going to change the law in Kansas. Ending the death penalty in Kansas requires that the House and Senate pass legislation. They're the ones that can do it. They have to pass repeal with a simple majority. It's going to take 63 votes in the House and 21 in the Senate. The governor can veto the legislation, but is not required to sign the bill for it to become law. The legislature can override his veto. In 2010, the Kansas State Senate debated a bill to repeal the death penalty, and it was narrowly defeated in a 20-20 tie vote. So where are we today? I've gone ahead and advanced this slide, but I'm just going to tell you that we have two bills. We have Senate Bill 126, which was introduced by Carolyn McGinn into the Judiciary Committee. There will probably be no action on the Senate side this year. That's not to say it will not happen in the next session in 2014. I want to mention that we do have our champion who has said what Jeremy said. Representative Becker, Stephen Becker from Bueller, is our House side legislative champion, and he said, if this costs me my seat, I don't care. It's the right thing to do. And so he is our gung-ho House champion. He introduced 2 days ago into Federal State Committee what has become House Bill 2397. And how that's going to go this year remains yet to be seen. If you go to the state's website and you want to read the text of the bill, it probably will not be up until Monday, according to the revisor of statute. So the bill name is there and the bill number is there, but if you want to read the text, you probably won't be able to do it till Monday. But I can tell you it is a bill that is identical to the ones in recent years, with one piece added to it, that cost savings from not having the death penalty will be redirected into a fund in the Attorney General's office for the benefit of families of murder victims and for mental health. And that is a reflection of the fact that some of these unlikely allies that Jeremy mentioned include folks who are very concerned about the cost of the death penalty. They are less concerned about religious and moral issues or the fact that the death penalty is barbaric, but they are very interested in the fact that it is costly. And again, to repeat what Laurie said, no execution since 1965 and a whole lot of costs for appeals and for court costs and for administrative segregation within the Department of Corrections and other related costs for having a death penalty. And, you know, there's just layers and layers of costs. And so some of the legislators are having a look at that and saying, well, we haven't executed anybody in 48 years, but we've got all this cost, so why are we doing that? So we are finding some unlikely allies among the folks who are very concerned about cost, some folks who are libertarians, some folks who are self-identified as Tea Party candidates or elected persons, and folks who are concerned about protecting life. So our strategy is the inside-out strategy, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jeremy to give us a little further explanation on what that exactly means.
All right, thanks, Mary. All right, you guys ready to talk strategy? This is the fun stuff. So the inside-out strategy is something we used in Illinois, and really it helps to speed up the timeline. If you, if you do just grassroots activism, you will abolish death penalty. It just will take it will take a lot of time. Now, if you have a straight lobbyist campaign, that's also going to take a lot of time, and I'll get into some of the reasons for that. But just to explain how this inside-out strategy works is really you have to pass a bill. You have a limited amount of time and resources, and to do that, you've really got to coordinate and work together. And the most important information you can get is from the legislators. You know, you need the votes, the 50% plus one, to make sure you pass legislation in the Senate and the House. So the lobbyists are your best bet to getting that kind of information. They've had the relationship with legislators for years, and they can really talk into that and get a little bit more insight with where the legislators are. Now, the lobbyists with that relationship, they will get different information than activists do. Now, activists have ties to the community and relationships, and they may know legislators on a personal level for many, many years. And they'll also be able to talk to legislators in a way that you really can't do if you're at the Capitol the same day or part of the I guess the State House atmosphere. So the way the Inside Out strategy works, the lobbyists inside get a baseline roll call or how legislators are going to vote on a bill to abolish the death penalty. Really figure out who's a yes, who's a no, and who's actually in the middle and who's really movable. So that kind of the staff of KCADP is really the go-between between the lobbyists and also the activists, really focusing the major efforts on only the movable people. And that's something that it took us a little time to learn in Illinois. Like we found somebody that was against the death penalty, so we just wanted to push really hard and convince them that the death penalty was wrong and that they were wrong. And we didn't start winning till we let go of that idea and just started focusing on the people that were closer to us, allies. As long as we were very open about seeing who our allies were and having very sincere and respectful conversations, we started to see that if everybody who was against the death penalty and sort of against the death penalty stood up at one time, we would win. And that's really where this strategy came about. So we were able to use the activists to make direct contacts and recruit others to do that work as well. And then because the activists are in that community, they're going to get different kinds of information. Bringing that back to staff and kind of having that information tied with the ones the lobbyist gets can really find that nuance of which legislators are saying they're on the fence to the activist and saying they're a hard no to the lobbyist, and where does that mean they really are in their thinking, and finding the people that kind of hedging their bets with or saying different things to the activists and the lobbyist. Where can we apply the pressure to get them to yes? Can we move on to the next slide? So first we'll start out with just really talking to legislators. Hearing from activists really matters because you have a different voice. The staff and the lobbyists, they talk to legislators all the time. They talk to them in a way about the reasons the death penalty is wrong. Now you are in a much different spot. If you're a constituent, you're in the community, and it's so important to say, I live in your community and I'm against the death penalty. Because when it comes down to it, that's really what legislators, want to hear if they're going to change their mind. They represent the community and take that very, very seriously. So there are specific messages that you want to work on, but I know we're going to get into that a little bit later in the presentation. But it's always really important to get the information of where the legislator is in very clear language. So if you're talking to a legislator and they're for repeal, well, that's an important time to really thank them and say, you've got my support and all of that. If they're not sure, that's a great opportunity to find out, what questions they have. Why are they for the death penalty? There are, valid reasons to be for the death penalty. Unfortunately for death penalty advocates, we have reasons against those reasons. So let's just take the time to walk the legislator, to yes, and figure out, why the death penalty is wrong in Kansas.